Good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I get my afternoon and evening mixed up, but we're glad to be with you this evening with Let's Talk with Gullie, our leadership monthly platform. And we're so blessed today to have a good speaker, Brendan Bartley, who's going to talk about a very important subject and kind of interesting title when he first gave it to me. But let's start with prayer. Father, we thank you for blessing us to come together this evening with leadership because we want to do the leadership that pleases you. Thank you, dear Lord, for Brendan being with us. Thank you for the audience that will come on and are on. And we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to take one scripture tonight and we're going to look at Matthew, the 20th chapter, verse 25. But Jesus called them unto him and said, Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great, uh, over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. So we want to make sure, basically what we're saying, let's not exercise and abuse people in leadership, but to be the leaders that people would love to follow. And number one, and most importantly, the leaders that God would have us to be. So I thank God again for Eric, and he will tell us more about himself. I'm excited, and we're excited for him to be on. So I don't want to go into too much before he starts, but I looked this up, and he's talking about adaptive leadership, and I started wondering what is adaptive leadership because I never heard it framed that way. And I've been in leadership for quite a few years, but I don't recall that particular name. And I looked it up. It is a practical framework and flexible leadership approach for mobilizing people to tackle complex challenges by embracing change, experimentation, and innovation. Like, I can kind of see it now because we don't want to be dictator leaders. We want to be leaders that we can pull people together and accomplish the goal. So, without further ado, it's all in your hands, Brendan. All in your hands.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me tonight. When I first heard about this opportunity, I thought, this is great, because I've been in leadership roles in my career for many years, and it's one of the things that I like to talk to people about. And so, just a little bit about me. Um, my experience in life is in law enforcement. I've been in law enforcement for 28 odd years now. I started with the Gloucester County Sheriff's Office back in 1997, and I spent a couple of years there. And then I wanted more action, so I went to the Newport News Police Department in '99, and lo and behold, plenty of action in Newport News. Um, one of the reasons that I went there, though, it wasn't just for the action, because I was young then, right? I wanted to go and be in all the excitement. But one of the reasons I went there is because when I was with Gloucester, it was a small agency and there weren't a lot of opportunities for growth there. But with Newport News, when I went there, we had about 425 officers at the time. They're at about 470 now. But they had a lot of different divisions and branches. We had our training unit, we had a Marine unit, we had motor units, we had K9, we had the SWAT team. Then we had a bunch of different detective positions, and then a lot of formal leadership positions as well. Sergeant, lieutenant, on up to the chief of police. And so it was a great opportunity to grow and learn and to become a better leader. And so that's why I went to Newport News. And I spent the next 24 years there, and then I retired and went over to, back in 2023, I retired and went to the Department of Juvenile Justice as a special agent. So still in law enforcement. It's not as exciting as Newport News, but it definitely has its challenges, and it has its rewards. And I think if anybody's thinking about going into law enforcement, you've got to focus on the rewards because it's a tough career. And the main reward being that you get to help people. But aside from just the general idea of it, some of the things that I did while I was there, I was a patrol officer, but then I went to our training unit for a couple of years, and it was when we'd first started our own internal police academy. And that was an opportunity to learn because as an instructor in the academy, you are responsible for all of those academy recruits. You're responsible for their well-being. You're responsible for their learning. You're responsible for guiding them and teaching them how to be a good police officer. And then I went to the gang unit, and I did the gang unit for a few years. And then I went to the FBI Safe Streets Task Force and worked gangs and organized crime with the FBI, and that was a whole different ball game. And I learned a lot there. But then after that, I became a sergeant, and I went back to patrol, and then I went to an investigations unit, and then I went back to the training unit where I was the assistant academy director. So I was responsible for the entire training program day to day with the Newport News Police Department as that the director. And then I also got my dream job in training to run the range for the last couple of years that I was there. And so out at the range, unless we're doing some training, like in-service training, I didn't have to see anybody. I could go out anytime and shoot, do what I wanted to do, and got to be kind of my own boss. So that was nice. Though I still had a staff, which I had to take care of. But then the biggest thing that I did there, and the place where I learned the most about leadership, was being part of the SWAT team. Now, the Newport News Police Department, like most agencies, they have a collateral duty SWAT team, which means you have your primary assignment, and then you go and train twice a month with the team, and then you are on call in case the team gets called out for a high-risk situation. And because of the nature of SWAT, that's where I learned the most about leadership, because it's very, very critical that you have good leadership with the team, because if you don't have good leadership, the team fails. And if the team fails, that could lead to someone losing their life. So it was very important. And that's where I really started to learn about adaptive leadership, because when you're dealing with something that is very high risk, very fast paced, and there is a great deal of potential for catastrophic endings, you have to learn how to adapt to your environment. And that means adapting to the team members and what they're going through and how they're feeling, and their skills and capabilities, and making sure that they're prepared for the job. But also dealing with people who on the police department outrank you, but don't have the same experience or training for a SWAT situation, but they want to have control. So learning how to work with them, things like that, because sometimes you don't just lead from the top. Sometimes you got to lead from the bottom. And when you have somebody who's a newly promoted captain and they want to do things in a certain way, but that's not the right way to do it, you've got to learn how to talk to them and tell them, hey, this is going to work if we do it this way, but it's not going to work if we do it that way, and lead them to the right choice without getting yourself in trouble, because that can happen. But kind of jumping back a little bit and thinking about where I really first started to learn about leadership, the first person who taught me anything about leadership was my father. And I owe him a great deal in my life because of the lessons that he taught me when I was young. And I think they helped to make me the person I am now. It gave me a good basis from which to start. And I think the most poignant thing that he taught me was this: So he was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and that was the rank he was when he retired. He left there and became a middle school teacher in Gloucester County. Um, I always believed that job was harder than when he was in the Air Force. But I give the man a lot of credit for doing both of those jobs. But the thing that he taught me was that leaders need to be good listeners. And if you don't listen to the folks that work for you or work more importantly with you, if you're the responsible party, but you don't listen to them, then they're going to feel unappreciated. They're going to feel undervalued. They may have a very good idea that if you don't listen to it, you end up falling down. Right? Because the fact of the matter is we can't know everything as one person. When we have a group or a team that's supporting us, if we support them by listening to them and being an active listener, not just listening to wait for them to stop so that we can talk, but listening to them so that we understand what they're saying and we can give them the proper feedback. Even if sometimes they don't have a good idea, if they're heard, if you let them be heard, they will feel appreciated, even if you have to tell them no. So that's the first thing that I learned about being a leader, is that you have to lead your people. You have to listen to them. Another thing that I did growing up is I played sports. And, I played football. I played a little bit of soccer. I played baseball. I played basketball. And the thing that I learned about being a teammate was that everybody on the team needs to be a leader. And you may have your team captain, right? And you may have your coaches, but everybody needs to be able to step up because, the team captain, they can't carry the weight every day. They need the help of everyone on the team. And so I learned that concept of team leadership as opposed to just a leader. Then, my 28 years in law enforcement, all the different positions that I held, I learned different aspects. But, outside of the team, the SWAT team, the area that I learned the most about leadership in, and I'm glad I did it before I became a sergeant, was working in the training unit and working with academy recruits. Because, like I remember when I went through the police academy, I went through it and I thought, all right, I'm tough and I'm gonna handle my business every day and I'm gonna be the guy that shows up all the time, right? And I thought I was that guy, and I didn't really remember anybody going through the academy with me that had a lot of problems. But then when I started as an instructor in the academy, and I saw kids coming through, and I say kids, I mean they were adults, but by that point I was 30 years old, and I was teaching guys who were 20, and so I looked at them as kids, like but they would come through, and what I started to recognize, because I was watching it happen, I was seeing kids that were struggling, whether it was with the physical aspects of it, because back then we used to do a lot of PT. I mean, it was a very kind of militaristic structure. And so I would see them struggling. In the physical aspect, that's easy. We just work with them, we build them up, and we get them where they need to be. But it was when I started to see the mental strain with some of these kids. They're trying to learn a code book of laws that's 4 inches thick, and they have to do written tests on this to learn that law. If they don't, they fail out of the academy. And I started seeing the stressors with these kids. And so what I learned from that is that I was a strong leader in the sense that if we needed to accomplish something, I could motivate people to accomplish it, like a difficult task. Like we would do team building exercises where we would have them move large tires and large logs and things like that. And we would have them work to climb over an 8-foot wall as a team, help each other over. Go for a run and, carry a downed officer. And we would do all these things. And I could motivate people to do that. I was very good at it. I was very high energy back then. And what I didn't have a lot of experience in, though, was helping pick somebody up by their bootstraps when they were struggling. Because the thing is, when you're trying to get somebody to get over a wall as a group, you tell them, get over the wall. You help him. You do this. You do that. You can physically get them over that wall, right? But when a person is down emotionally, yelling at them to get over the wall, it's not going to cut it. You have to learn how to empathize with those kids and let them know that they're not the only one that's struggling with this, and let them know that there are ways to get better. There are ways to get through this, and to show them. And so I started to get better at that, the empathy aspect of being a leader. Because, if you stand back as a leader and you just look at people and go, why aren't you getting the job done? I mean, if all you ever do is question, how are you helping them? But if you don't know what they're going through, that's where you've got to learn to empathize. And if you empathize with these kids and you show them that you care, you can get them to accomplish their goals. And then once they do accomplish it, you don't have to praise them ridiculously, but if you say, you know what, that's how you get this done. You did that. You don't have to say, man, you did a great job, but you tell them, look, you did that. And they take that to heart and they go, you know what, I can do this. And that's how you build those kids up. And that's what I learned working in the police academy. The other aspect that I learned in the training unit is leading from the bottom up. Because my first year in the training unit, I ran the academy. My second year, they put me in charge of in-service training. And every police officer has to go through 40 hours of in-service training every 2 years. At Newport News, we used to try to do 40 hours every year so that we got twice as much training as required. But that means everybody, from the newest police officer all the way up to the chief of police, has to go through this training. And the way that we did our training is we made everybody do the exact same training. And it didn't matter who they were, because we would do physical aspects, like we would teach officers how to team arrest a resisting subject. And so everybody has to learn to do it, because you never know who your partner is going to be on a call. So even the chief of police needs to learn exactly what his officers are doing, one, so that he can do it if he's out there. And we had chiefs who were out there. I mean, it was unusual, but like when Chief Fox came to Newport News, the day that I met him, it was on a call for service. There was a guy that was supposed to have cocaine and a gun, and he was walking up the side of Jefferson Avenue, and we had a great description of him. And I pulled up on him, and I heard another unit mark out, and they said they were coming up another street. And the guy turned to run from me. This car stops, and out pops Chief James D. Fox. And he's with immaculate uniform. He's got his hat on, and he steps out. And like me and the guy, we're both stunned. We're like, the chief of police, right? Couldn't believe it. And that was the first day I met the man, which was nice. But that's the thing. It could be any officer that's your backup. So we all had to learn the same thing. But what I ended up learning is, I was a police officer. And I was teaching sergeants and lieutenants and captains and assistant chiefs and the chief of police. And when you're the instructor in front of the class, all the rank goes out the window. You're in charge. So here I was, a guy with about 8 years in law enforcement, 9 years in law enforcement. And I have a room full of these people who've been in law enforcement for 20, 30 years. And they all outrank me by 4 or 5 levels. And I'm having to tell them what to do. Right. And so, it's a little different from them in an academy recruit. With an academy recruit, if I need them to get something done, I'm like, go do this right now. With the chief of police, I'm like, hey, sir, would you mind doing this? And so, I had to learn how to lead up. And that helped build me quite a bit, and prepare me for when I got into positions where I was in those formal leadership roles. Um, and then and then came my time with the team. So I'd been with the department for about 3 years when I joined the SWAT team. And I wanted to do that because, again, I was young. I thought it'd be exciting. And it was. What I didn't realize is that it would turn into a passion for me. Back in those days, most guys, they would stay on the team for 5, 6 years and then they would move on. Um, Part of that was because they had a rule that if you got promoted to sergeant, you had to leave the team, which I never agreed with, because it's like you take a guy and you give him 5 years of training and then he gets promoted, so you just boot him out. So you just pushed all that experience out. We eventually had a chief that changed that rule, and so that was great. It actually helped the team quite a bit with retaining experience. But joining the team, this is where I learned servant leadership. And servant leadership is a style of leadership that has to be adaptable. And you have to learn that even though you may be in a position of power and authority, and you have the position of authority, you have the title, which infers the power, it all becomes about how you use that power. Because when you're in charge, you can just give demands and edicts, and you can tell people to do things and expect that they'll be done. And in some cases, you do have to do that, right? When something is critical and it must be done now, you have to just give that order. But the vast majority of the time, what you should be doing is using that power to support the people that work with you. Because that power allows you to do it. And if you support people and you coach people and you teach people and you take that power that you have and you hand it to them and say, here, take this with my authority and go out and do this. And you let people make decisions for themselves, and you allow people to make choices without a ton of oversight, they will learn to use that effectively, and they will grow as leaders. And then at a certain point, if you have properly served your people and taken care of your people, at a certain point, you can step away and everything will run. And people will accomplish goals without needing you to be there to make it happen. And ultimately, that's the goal, right? Ultimately, a true leader wants their people to become so successful that they don't need you anymore. And if you do that well, they may not need you, but they're always going to want you. And that the best leaders that I ever had, particularly on the team leaders that taught me leadership, that taught me how to be a good operator, those guys, like when they left the team, it was terrible, right? When they retired from the police department and moved on in their lives, for me, it was horrible because I knew their value and I knew what they had done for me. And so I always wanted them there. And so when I came into formal leadership roles with the team, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be that person that the day that I left, number one, and most importantly, the team could continue on and be successful. But two, that the guys would miss me and they would want me there. And I like to believe that I accomplished that. When I talk to the guys now, and I talk to some of the guys pretty regularly, they're like, "Man, you should have been there for the call out. I wish you'd been there and seen this." Things like that. And then the most important part though is hearing about the call outs they went on and that they were successful. And so that to me is you know, that's that's the win for me, right? That's how I know that I did good work when I was there. Um, yeah. So, we talk about words, right, that we use for, to describe good leaders. And I'm going to throw some out there for you because I think they're important. Things like integrity. Right? A good leader has integrity. A good leader is that person that you can always count on to be truthful and be honest, even when it's ugly. Some of the hardest things that I've had to do when I've had somebody come to me when they've had a difficulty or a problem, like they violated a policy, or they got into trouble off duty, or something else happened in their life, and they come to me and they go, "Hey, Sarge, I messed up, but it's going to be okay, right?" And the hardest thing that I've had to do at times is tell them, you know what, you'll be able to move on in life, but this is not okay. And to be straightforward and truthful with them about what they did, because hiding it from them on the spot and trying to make them feel better and comfort them is not always the best way to be, because it gives them a false sense. And it also teaches them not to be honest with other people when the chips are down. And so you have to. And that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. And I don't like it, because I would have loved to have been like, "Oh yeah, man, you're gonna be fine." But that's not the reality. A good leader is always honest with his people. And that just goes right in with accountability, right? Um, you need to be accountable for yourself, and you need to hold others accountable as a leader. Um, and this is something that was really driven home to me when I was part of the team, the SWAT team, because we got an opportunity to train with some military units. We trained with, we had some training from a guy that was a Delta operator with the United States Army, which, if you're not familiar with Delta, Delta is the tier one Army asset. They are, you can watch movies about them and read books about them. These guys, they are one of the first units that was sent to Afghanistan in 2001 to hunt for Osama bin Laden. And the guy that we got to train with, he was one of those men that went over there. And there's a couple of books, and he's mentioned in them, not by his actual name, but by a nickname. But, amazing guy. And the things that he taught us were pretty amazing. Just like the tactics and everything else were just excellent. But there's one thing I'll get to in a minute that he taught us. But we also had the opportunity to go down to Virginia Beach and train with Dev Group, which is SEAL Team 6. The same guys that went and got Osama bin Laden. The same guys, they did the rescue of Captain Phillips out in the Indian Ocean. So like amazing tier one operators. And they taught us a ton of great tactics. And we learned so much from them on the physical aspects of tactical operations. But the thing that both of those units and the folks from those units taught us was about accountability. And it was a very simple form and a simple way to do it. But it was very profound to me. And what it was every time they would do a training run, like the team would go and, clear a building. At the end of it, they would come together and do a debrief. And the way that we had done debriefs with our SWAT team is we would do a practice run, and then the team leaders, whether it was before I was a team leader or once I first became a team leader, we would sit down and we would go person by person. We'd say, "All right, this is what you did. This is what you did. This is what you did." And we, as the leadership, would hold them accountable for their actions. Well, that's not the way Dev Group and Delta does it. What they do is they go around And the team leader goes, all right, let's start with you. What mistake did you make? And that first guy will tell you, I didn't clear my corner, or I didn't wait for my buddy to enter that room, or, whatever it was, I didn't clear the stairwell. Whatever it was, they would go around the group and they would all point out what they failed at. And that was accountability on a whole nother level, right? And I was watching this and I was like, you know what? That's amazing. Everyone here is showing leadership by taking responsibility for themselves. And there was no question. And nobody was, giving them a hard time over it. Nobody was being derisive. Nobody was doing anything that would indicate that they had a problem with what the guy did, because they took accountability for themselves. And then when they went and did their next run, they didn't make that same mistake again. And it was because they recognized it in themselves, and it was because they took accountability, and they did that, and they made themselves improve. They got better on the next run. And it was amazing watching it. And we saw that. And when we were getting together to close down for the day of training, I pulled everybody together. I said, all right, look, guys, I'm not even going to ask if you guys want to do this. This is what we're doing from now on. And like everybody there was like, absolutely, Sarge, we agree. And once we did that, our team cohesion became so much better. Because up to that point, when we would debrief and like I would point out, hey, you failed to clear your corner, it was me telling them you did wrong. When we went to the point where we were each going, this is what I did wrong, we were telling the rest of the team that we were going to do better individually, and we were going to do a better job for the team. And that leadership style, because that was everybody taking the leadership role, that enabled everybody to trust each other and to build off of each other. And then when we went on a call out, when we got called out in the middle of the night to go handle a hostage situation, we got out there and we knew that everyone was on point and everyone was prepared and everyone was going to do their best to make this a successful operation. And that was another aspect for me of the adaptive leadership. I had to take, because me and the other guys, we're all alpha personalities, right? We all are willing to take charge. Like at this point, all the guys on the team, our average time on the team, back when I first got on, was about 5 years max. At this point, we got a bunch of guys who are 10 to 15 years on the team. So like everybody's super experienced and everybody is willing to take charge at any moment because they can. And so for me, being the senior team leader and the guy who had all the power and all the authority, I could go on call outs and I could be like, do this, this, and this. That was easy. But I had to learn to adapt and let those guys, let the reins go, right? And let them do their jobs. And that became the best way for the team to function. And then that's, by the time I left the team, by the time I retired, because I didn't leave the team until the day I retired. I would have, if I'd stayed with Newport News another 10 years, I'd still be on the team. But the day that I retired and left the team, I knew that they would be able to handle business because we had developed everyone as a leader. So some other things, I've kind of hit on them a little bit without saying the words, but decisiveness. You got to be able to make a decision and then stick to the decision, especially when it's hard, right? And that means, like in my world, it was hard because it would be dangerous, right? But even when it wasn't dangerous, the hardest decisions to make are the ones that somebody's going to be unhappy about. And as a leader, even though you don't want to, you want to build everybody up and help everybody. Sometimes as a leader, you've got to stand your ground and say, no, this is how it has to be. We can't do that. And that jumps into something that used to make me a little crazy. I've had leaders that, you'd come to him and you'd say, hey, Lieutenant, or hey, Captain, I would like to do this, right? I would like to make this change to how we're operating because I think it would be more effective. And it'd be something that they were uncomfortable with or something that they didn't necessarily agree with. And instead of saying, Sergeant Bartley, it's not a terrible idea, but I'd rather just stick with what we're doing, they would say, well, let me check with the boss. And then a day later, they would say, yeah, I know the captain said no, or the assistant chief said no. And, that's okay if they actually did that. But what you'd find out sometimes is that they weren't actually checking. They were just saying no, but they were blaming it on the guy up above them so that they didn't have to take responsibility for that decision, right? And so they didn't have to have Sergeant Bartley looking at him like, well, I don't like how you think, sir or lieutenant. And that's something you can't do as a leader. The moment that the people that work with you find out that you blamed your decision on somebody above you, you've now lost all credibility with that. They're never going to believe it when you tell them that the boss said no. And inevitably, they're going to find out. Like, I know that it happened with me because with Newport News, we would change assignments every few years. And one day I'm working for one guy, a month later I'm working for another guy, and I say, hey man, this is the idea I presented to the old boss, and he said you said no. What do you think now? They'd go, I never heard of that. So it was never presented to them. So you can't do that. You've got to stand your ground if you're going to make a decision and tell them, that's right, I said no. And they're going to respect that. They may not like your decision, but they'll respect it. A couple other things, self-improvement, right? Too many times you'll get people who get rank or position, and once they get there, they stop advancing, right? They stop building themselves. The best leaders out there, and it doesn't matter what the business is or the job is, the best leaders out there are going to be people who will get into a position and then they will learn, right? Because the thing is, sometimes when you get promoted, you don't stay in the same lane you were in. Like for me, when I first got promoted to sergeant, they put me back out in patrol, which I'd been a patrol officer, so I knew how to run a patrol operation. But the next assignment I got was in property crimes. And I was now running a unit that did robberies, burglaries, and auto theft. And I had never worked any of those three positions as a detective. So I didn't know how they did their investigations. I mean, investigations have, some very basic things that you do with all investigations, but like armed robberies, business robberies, there are specific things that you need to do. And if you've never done them, you don't know how. So they put me in that position as a supervisor. And I walked in and I was like, you know what? I got a couple of detectives in this unit. One of them had 36 years. The other one had 32 years in law enforcement. And they'd both been working in this particular unit for 12 or 15 years. So I knew they knew what they were doing. So I walked in and I said, all right, come here, guys. I need to talk to you. And I pulled the two of them. We all went into an interview room. And these interview rooms were tiny. So the three of us in there was like kind of crowded. But I was like, listen, guys, I don't know what I'm doing. So I need you guys to teach me how to do these investigations. And that way I can supervise you. And, I know some people would be nervous about walking in and telling a new subordinate, hey, man, you know more than me. You got to teach me how to do this. And you know what? The downside is if they're not a good person, maybe they go, yeah, great, I got an idiot I'm working for. But the way I looked at it was if they took that attitude, that's okay. Because, sometimes you're going to have employees that aren't the best people. But if they taught me what I needed to know, then what that meant is that I could adequately supervise them and get them what they needed to accomplish their job. And those two guys, they were like, Sarge, you need us to teach you? I'm like, yeah, man, I may be a sergeant, but I'm a sergeant because I did other stuff. I've never done this. And those guys, they were like, you are the first guy to come into this job and ask us how to do the job. And the thing is, most of their supervisors over the years had never worked that job as a detective before either. And so they were coming in and basically they were just assigning cases and letting the guys go work them. And so the guys could have done whatever they wanted to. But these two taught me how to do that stuff. And then I was able to use what they taught me to help them get what they needed and do their job. But then to also, when I had new detectives coming in, I could help them and help show them the ropes rather than sit there and go, yeah, go talk to Trong. He'll tell you how to do this, which I did a lot of because Trong was a super smart guy. And he knew way more than I would ever know about that. But I could help. I wasn't that guy that sat in the corner and assigned cases, because I went looking for what I needed to do my job better. So you've always got to keep doing that to improve. We've already hit on this one too, empowerment. You take the power that you've got based on your position and you give it to the people who work for you. Let them run with it. Let them be successful. And then be the example, right? As a sergeant, when I was in Newport News, if I wanted to show up late to work, I could. Nobody was going to question me. My lieutenant might, but I knew what days my lieutenant worked. So if he wasn't working, I could have just come in late, right? I know a lot of sergeants that at the end of the day, if their people were still working, the sergeant would go home. Because if they were working on cases, there might not be anything for the sergeant to do other than sit there. But I took the position that if my people were going to be at work, so was I. Even if I wasn't doing anything really productive, being there so that if they had a need, they didn't have to try and call me at home or wait till the next day. They could turn and go, hey, Sarge, we need to get somebody to go out to this house and check for this car. I could do it. I could go do it myself, or I could send a patrol officer. And so being there for your people whenever they need you is the example that people need. If they see that behavior, they will emulate that behavior. And so then when the team needs them, they'll be there for the team. And so you've always got to be that example. And we've already talked about a couple of these things. We've talked about servant leadership. We've talked about leading from the top and leading from the bottom. And, all of those things together, if you're being a servant leader, then it doesn't matter what position you are in the ladder. You're going to lead from the top down and you're going to lead from the bottom up. And you're going to put yourself in the position to be the person that people come to when there's a problem. And I knew guys that I worked with that to this day, like if I run into an obstacle and I'm having a problem figuring it out, like I'll call them. Guys that I worked with that left the department before I did. I'll actually call and be like, man, so I've run into this problem and I've never dealt with it before. And you know what? Those dudes, because they're still good leaders, they will help me work my way through it. And that's caused me in turn to do the same thing for others when they call me. Because even when your official tie to a place ends, like when I retired, if you've been a good leader and you've built good relationships with the people you work with, then they're still going to look to you as that leader. And they're still going to look to you for help. And that's a very gratifying feeling. So I'm going to kind of tell you guys a little story about how successful a group can be if you have good leadership. And this is about my 20 years with the SWAT team. And very few units within the police department um, did I ever see that consistently had good leadership. Um, I may be a little biased because I love being part of the team, but the team was the only place where I believe that there was consistent leadership through the entire time, my entire 20 years. And that, I guess the proof in the pudding for me on that is this. So in my 20 years in the SWAT team, we dealt with high risk situations all the time. And that's what a SWAT team is for. Like, a SWAT team shouldn't be out there for, a domestic, right? They shouldn't be out there for a speeding complaint, right? They're not out there, you don't need a bunch of guys with heavy body armor and helmets and rifles to go and deal with day-to-day calls for service. If a police department is doing that, well, they're just doing the wrong thing. A SWAT team should only be called in for situations that are so dire that your regularly trained and armed patrol officers can't handle it. Like, people will lose their lives if you don't bring the team out. That's the only time a team should be employed, because it's not needed for everything else, day-to-day police operations. But with that being said, there's kind of a misperception about SWAT teams. A lot of people think when you say SWAT team that you're going to have a bunch of guys come out there with all this body armor on and driving armored vehicles and just kicking in doors and shooting people, and just like, it's a lot of people think that when a SWAT team arrives that somebody is going to get shot. And that may be true in the past, because like back in the 1960s when they first started SWAT teams, all of their training was based on military tactics. And military tactics back in the Vietnam era were kick in the door, throwing a frag grenade, and come in shooting, right? Well, you can't do that as police officers, but that was the training. And so SWAT teams looked pretty heavy-handed in the past. Well, modern police tactics and modern police training, particularly in the field of SWAT, and our team was very good at it because we had good leaders. When I joined the team, our big thing was, we want you to be fit, we want you to be a good shot, but we want you to be a thinker. We want you to use this more than anything else. Because if you use your mind and you make good choices, you can avoid needing to be physically fit and fight people, and you can avoid having to shoot people. And that was one of the first lessons I got with the team. The next lesson I got with the team is that I'd always need to be ready to step up. Because if we got called out at 2:00 in the morning for, an armed barricaded subject who was shooting at officers, I might be the first guy who gets there, and I might be the most junior guy on the team, but I might have to handle business. And so they started ingraining in me that I had to be a leader, and they told me, you may be the newest guy on the team, but you'll show up to a call out and there will be a bunch of guys there with 15, 20 years in law enforcement, and they've got, sergeant stripes and captain's bars, but they're going to turn around, they're going to look, and they're going to see you, and they're going to be like, one of the SWAT guys here, he'll handle it. So it got ingrained in me very quickly that I would have to step up and start telling folks how to get this accomplished if I was the first guy there. And so I learned that I had to be a leader, and I learned that I had to use my mind to accomplish my goals. And in my 20 years, we did hundreds of high-risk operations, including dealing with armed barricaded subjects, armed with guns, armed, sometimes with assault rifles, things like that. Sometimes they were actively shooting at law enforcement. Sometimes we would deal with high-risk search warrants for people like murder suspects and shooting suspects. Sometimes we went after federal fugitives. Other times we did high risk narcotics warrants. And whenever you go on a narcotics warrant, the chance of a gun being in there is huge. And the chance of, if you do things wrong, you're going to force a confrontation, which could result in a violent encounter, right? And then the big one for us was hostage situations. When a person is being held at gunpoint and someone is threatening to kill them. And so we would get all those incidents. And over 20 years and hundreds of incidents, the thing that showed me that we were a good team and that we were using our heads and that everybody was stepping up when they needed to as a leader, depending on, the circumstances. Because I may have been on the team for, 15 years, but I was never a breacher. And I might need to get into a house. So I have another guy that's only been on the team for 4 years, but he's my explosive breacher. I need to trust that he's going to be able to get us in that house safely. And so I turn it over to him. So that man becomes the leader, right? And our team became so successful that in the course of 20 years, our team only shot 2 people out of hundreds of situations that could have resulted in a violent encounter. We only shot 2 people. And both of those were on hostage situations. In both of those incidents, one, the guy had just said that he needed a phone so that the girl he was holding hostage could call her kids and say goodbye, which was a clear indication that he was about to kill her. The other one, the guy was holding multiple hostages in a bar, and he had already shot the bartender. And the bartender was on the phone with 911, begging the police to come in and save him. And he was saying things like, "I'm getting cold. I can't feel my legs." We knew he was dying. And so on both of those, unfortunately, we had to take a life. But we saved the hostages. The girl that was being held hostage, and she was being held hostage in a car, we saved her life, and she got to go see her kids. The bartender, we saved his life, and he got to go home to his family. And while we wished that we would never have to do that, we only had to do it twice in 20 years out of hundreds of situations. And it was because the team had good leadership from the day I got on it, and it had good leadership the day that I left it. My last day that I was officially employed with the city of Newport News, I had gone on terminal leave. I'd turned in all of my equipment because we were required to turn in everything before our last day on the books. So I was done. Like, I didn't have anything to go to work with. I still, on my phone, was still attached to the paging system, and the team got called out. And so I got a buddy's radio, and I listened to parts of it. And, I was paying attention to what was going on. I had other guys texting me that were there. And, I was very worried about the team because this guy, I forget what he was wanted for. It was some type of violence, but he had shot at patrol officers when they went there. And then he repeatedly shot at the team when they were out there. And despite the fact the guy repeatedly shot at the team wore him down. They used good sound tactics, made good leadership decisions, and they ended up getting the guy into custody without being harmed. Right? Those guys that I'd worked with for years that I was, so worried that the day that I left that something bad might happen to them, they were extremely successful in that. And then about 6 months later, they had our next hostage situation. And I wasn't there for it. I heard about it the following day. And this ended up being the third shooting that the team had after I joined the team. But it was a hostage situation, and the guy was getting ready to kill his girlfriend. And the team entered the house, and they shot the suspect and saved the woman. And there's no operation that SWAT teams do that is more difficult than doing a hostage rescue. And the team did it, and they did a great job. They saved the woman. And looking back at it, I was like, you know what? I did okay, right? I did okay as a leader because I prepared them for this, and they were successful. And not just because of me. They're good. They're good operators. They're good leaders themselves. I like to think I did my part to help get them ready. So that's been kind of my leadership journey.
Awesome one.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, there's nothing special about me. Just to throw that out there, right? Um, I I think that the leaders that I had growing up, starting with my dad and then my coaches and the people who trained me when I came into law enforcement, they are what made me capable. So when it boils down to everything, your job as a leader is to make the next leader that takes your place able to do his job. So, any questions or?
Well, Brandon, I don't have a question right now, but I would, of course, I can go back and review this, but I would take some notes, and I got a lot of them. But if I can sum this up and try to do it in a few words, it's that, and you mentioned about your father, then those after him, and leadership is so important that we need to. It's in us anyway to lead, whether we are leading in a unfortunate bad situation or good. It's inside of a person. But I like, again, if I can sum this up, we as leaders, we should build to be succeeded.
Yes.
I'll allude that to, let's say, I like football, quarterback. And you shouldn't really be threatened by your job in life anyway, because you do a good enough job, you have a job. And then, but when someone else comes in, a rookie, a new person, we should try to elevate them, because anytime you elevate someone else, it's going to force you to elevate. And then
Absolutely.
you mentioned about integrity, accountability, decisiveness, self-improvement, and be that example. But in a nutshell, in your tenure there, in those adverse hostage situations, unfortunately, two people lost their lives versus many others could have, because you are thinkers. And that's what a leader has to be, a thinker, and also to lead others. And you have mentioned, of course, we lead from top to bottom, but the reversal is really from the bottom to the top, because everyone on that team should be a leader. That works as well in ministry, in law enforcement for you, vocation, social, sports, anything. We have to not mind letting someone else lead in an area that we're not strong in. I give you a perfect example. I'm the pastor. My wife is co-pastoring. But there are many times some decisions I've made or what I'm thinking about, and after we talked about it, and I kind of want to have it my way a few times, I'm so glad I humbled myself by the grace of God. And I look back and say, oh, I would have made a mess. So this leadership thing, and I'm going to look over these things, but it's very important that we don't become so arrogant and cocky and think we'll, quote unquote, all of that. So Brenda, I really thank you. I don't see any questions. Sometimes they'll chat in, but I'm going to tell you, this was a wealth of information. Pastor Jay, do you have any questions or comments? Your computer working right? Oh,
Good evening. I am so sorry. I was on mute. Good evening. Very good information,
Thank
Brandon.
you.
I was listening to you, and it just sounded like a repeat of my managerial days. Um,
Yeah.
in corporate America. But the thing I enjoyed about your presentation was it gave me more insight about, I think about sometimes the leading, corporate America, or from where we are with leading as pastors and shepherding others, and for instructing people day to day. But it drove home more to me as you talked about leadership from the perspective of where lives, and these, in situations like this, lives are involved as well. But it drove it home more to me about the life of individuals. If we don't think, if we don't act as we should, and conduct ourselves as we should, and be those adaptive, to be able to, I heard you say my key word, I love that word, integrity, tonight. If we don't do what we do in integrity, and having empathy for others and valuing others, these are key aspects of a good leader leading into a great leader. And it is so important that we realize how these, these things impact the lives of other people as we are leading people. Other people's very depend on us, being that person who is adaptive or not adaptive, to, as you say before, to be including others, seeing what other people say and feel about a situation, and having their input. All of that is important. And but I just kept it just kept rolling around in my head when you were talking about the hostage situation. And if you had not thought clearly and made a sound judgment call, and being willing to um, think about the lives of other people, because it's not, as a good leader, it's not just about us, right? It's about
Exactly.
others, and what's going to happen with other people. And so it makes us really think. So this drove home leadership to me from a whole different perspective tonight. And I really do appreciate you for sharing with us, and for your story being so real, so surreal to us, and that we could drive it home. And I could see, your passion in what you did, that you loved it. I think you still love it. And um, you know, I love the other point that you said, that a good leader, um, it's important that you know that you're a good leader when others can carry on without you, but it's
Yes.
also important to know that you are wanted. And I I I can, relate to that. When I left 44 years of management, others were calling me Miss J, Miss J, we miss you, Miss J. But they kept the work going. They
Right.
kept what they had been trained to do going, and they were great. They're great at it. And so it, speaks to, me feeling good that I did something good or something right. So thank you so much for this information. It was very good. And I hope others will replay it and listen to it.
Thank
Yes.
you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me.
Sure. Sure.
We're definitely delighted. I've learned a lot of this. I've heard and understand, but a lot of times you need to rehear it. But it's a whole lot that I did not know.
Yeah.
And you're like in any leadership capacity, but especially in you all situation, one wrong move, people could die. That's a responsibility. We deal in ministry, of course, with souls, with people and their livelihood, but you're dealing also with the, I'll call it, top of the line. One bad mistake, the whole family can be destroyed. So I thank you very, very much. I mean, this has been
Thanks.
enlightening. It has been eye opening.
Yes.
I don't know how to describe it. Just thank you so much. And I would love to let's talk sometime even after this. Don't let this be the last time that we
Yeah, that
talk,
sounds good. Yeah.
because it was a wealth of information.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thank you very much, and we thank God for our audience, and as Pastor Jay said, those who would view it later on, you can still make comments. And so we are just so thankful for that. So we're going to get ready to close out, and we will close out in prayer. Father, we thank you for blessing us. Thank you for keeping us. Thank you for protecting our hearts, dear God, that we'll be the people that you would have us to be. And we thank you for it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And we thank you all again. This is Gullie and
Brendan.
we thank you for joining us tonight for Let's Talk with Gullie, our monthly leadership platform. And continue to follow us, like us, share us, that we may accomplish what God has called us to do. So you have a good night. We hope to see many of you in the morning with Breakfast with Us, your early mornings boost brought to you by Rock Faith and Simple Balance Life Ministries. And we will say good night and sleep tight. Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
Yes.